All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
I am Stu, and today we are doing an unconventional episode by our, August 21 episode standards, in that we are covering an extremely recent event, namely the uh, recent debate between Donald Trump and Joseph Robinette Biden, and the sort of run up to the 2024 U.S. presidential election more generally. We're going to go over some highs and lows, mostly lows, from the debate itself. We'll talk a little bit about what the future might hold in a Biden wins scenario, what it might hold in a Trump wins scenario, and then we'll talk or what?
Neither.
Oh
Right?
yeah,
A
well,
new possibility has emerged indeed.
uh,
A Pete Buttigieg victory. Should we
uh,
go over that
yeah,
potentially?
we've got to spend hours dissecting the G.
Gavin Newsom, perhaps.
Yeah. There's a lot of wild cards are circling around the fringes of the
Oh, the
campaign
the
at the
betting
moment.
the betting companies are having a field day with this.
It's free money for them, right?
Absolutely.
In any case, at the end of the episode, we'll also talk maybe about some parallels from history, some other
Hmm.
times when
Things were
it's
going great.
yeah, definitely the word gerontocracy will not be invoked at any point. But Michael, you're the one that spearheaded us in this bold and striking new direction. What were you thinking about how all of this might connect to the end of the world?
Well, I think at a basic level, we're talking about the simplicity of stretching out the podcast a bit. We're going to have to do a few different things than just absorbing all of the apocalyptic content that we like to go through. And this seemed like a natural place because of and I think I was right. I mean, I asked you to do this before the debate, right? We planned to do this before the debate. And I think that my bold decision was justified because it felt like there was apocalyptic overtones all throughout the hour and a half, which felt, I think you would agree, like forever. It was exhausting
I mean, how
to
long? All
watch
right,
it.
so a little background here. We got together, we watched the first half of the US's disastrous game
Mm-hmm.
against Panama.
Foreboding. Little did we know.
We went to a friend's birthday party, and then we went back to your apartment to watch the debate. How long
Yeah.
was it into the debate before I picked up your guitar and started like
I think
playing?
it was about 11 minutes, but honestly, my whole relationship with time sort of went out the window. And like, I don't know, I mean, to finish the sort of answer to the question, yeah, I think that, when it comes to the end of the world and it comes to apocalyptic thinking, I think that the American political world is in the throes of it. I mean, as we've discussed, we're not just talking about the literal end of the actual world. We're
Right,
talking
right.
about paradigm shifts and
Falls of
I mean,
civilizations.
yeah, and I mean, I remember I was spending most of my time on Twitter doom scrolling while listening because I couldn't not like I don't have sympathy for Joe Biden, and despite that, so it wasn't out of sympathy, but like I could not bring myself to make eye contact with the screen while he
Yeah.
was talking. I felt it was so uncomfortable, and there was this tweet I came across. It was someone tweeting about how their historian friend texted them that it really feels like America's in its end of Soviet era, and I think there's something interesting
Yeah,
in
I
that.
was. That's actually one of the comparisons I was going to bring up later. Yeah, the historian and podcaster Patrick Wyman tweeted, "Amazing Paul von Hindenburg vibes coming from both sides of the debate stage." I don't even know Hindenburg. He was the World War One general who was elected president of the Weimar Republic in the late 20s, and he was the guy who was kind of like, yeah, this Hitler guy's harmless. Let's just give him a shot. And he was,
Right,
in fact, like 85 years old at that point, and just
right.
essentially abetted the rise of the most deleterious political figure of all time. So yeah, I think yeah, there are plenty of good historian tweets coming in
I
from
guess you're waiting for a moment like this as a historian to get your tweets off, right?
well, right. I mean, or to get your op-eds in and whatnot. So
Well,
we
we'll
have
talk about the op-eds in a bit.
good. We have a bit of a history with politics. I mean, we mentioned it at the end of last week's episode, but I'll never forget that we were watching. It's 2016. We were probably watching an early season NBA game or something at this sports bar we used to go to all the time.
Mhm.
And I think I was giving you a ride home afterwards or
Yeah.
something.
Yep.
And we were sitting in the car getting ready to leave. And it was the day that Hillary had come out with her famous, like, I will accept the results of the election no matter
Right,
what.
right.
And you
This
were
whole year
like,
that it became part of her stump speech, actually, is what we were talking about. It was her part of her closing argument, right?
yeah. And it was a weirdly arrogant, like, I'm going to win and I will accept the results.
Right, and to sort of show how out of touch Trump is with the strength of American democracy, the health of American democracy, that he who is already sort of threatening, like, oh, we'll wait and see what happens on the day, that Hillary Clinton's like, he doesn't understand, how much work and how precious this democratic system of ours is, but I do. I do. So no matter what happens, I will graciously accept the results of my impending victory, was essentially
Yeah, and I'll
the
never forget
attitude.
you kind of turned to me in the car and you were like, I think this is a bad move.
Yeah.
Because if she doesn't win, she's essentially or if it's close or if it's a contested, if it's
Yeah.
Florida
Which there
2020
has been one
2000.
in our lifetime,
Yeah,
right?
I mean literally 16 years prior at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because that whole election there was this odd sense of doom in the back of my mind where I remember being at the NBA draft at the Barclays Center with my friend Evan, and that was the day that Brexit went through, and it
Oh
was
yeah. It
like,
was a good year
and
all
it was
around.
like
Forgot about
I
that.
remember checking the percentages, and like Remain was like leading or whatever, and I was like, oh well, yeah, it's fine. And then I think by the end of the first round, we were getting up to depart. It was like, oh, the tables have turned.
Yeah.
like
Just after like the Celtics traded back or whatever, and you got up to
yeah.
leave and uh-oh, they're leaving.
Yeah, and I think a little bit later that same year, the same friend Evan was like, it's kind of a shame that we'll never actually get to see what a Donald Trump presidency was like. This was in September or something
I
before.
wonder if he still thinks about that.
Yeah, I'll have to ask
Like he
him.
somehow ushered in the Trump era with this vibe.
No, but I mean, but I remember at the time being like, yeah, it is a shame, I think, or just like, but even then, just having this kind of sense of doom, like even when it seemed like things were quote unquote going well, or like that like I didn't trust it, and then we went to watch the election on election night at the very place you're recording from by chance,
That's
a
right,
friend of
right.
ours
At
house
my friend's place.
that you're cat sitting for at the
And I
moment.
was I was I was pretty confident.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, it was, confidence the wrong word because I wasn't, you're not. It's cheering for the Democrats is such a strange.
It's not like rooting for England in soccer in some
Right. I don't
ways.
know if it's cognitive dissonance, right? Yeah, well, whatever the phenomenon is at play, it's very despairing because, I wasn't looking forward to the gleeful fucking narcissistic coronation of Hillary Clinton.
Well, I think
But at the same time,
we're in the same position again. I feel like a lot of the same ominous vibes have begun to ruminate
yeah,
the
I
word
think so too.
to
But just to
resonate
just to
for
sort
me.
of just to finish sort of the thought you were talking about with 2016, I think this has been happening our whole lifetime. I mean, from 2000 was certainly a moment
My first election.
with the Bush Gore election, and you see this time and again where what seems to be happening is um, the left as it's considered in the mainstream political discourse, the Democratic Party and the right, the Republicans, um, that one is expert at giving away power and one is expert at taking it. And with 16, what I meant by the contested election stuff, like she starts saying this holier than thou rhetoric about the sanctity of elections, even though, like you said, 16 years before there was an election that was at the very least contested and, you know, probably honestly taken from Gore,
Oh,
right?
take it. Yeah.
Um, but this is the thing, is that like the Democrats play naive to the point where you do start searching for ulterior motives, where it's like it's so stunning how often they run this playbook of placing themselves in these intractable situations. um whether it's with Trump, like the whole like, oh, we got the grab him by the pussy video, that'll be it, right? Like the total
Well, in that
inability.
they like wanted the candidate to be Trump, right? I
Right.
mean,
Like I always come back to this moment. Obama said something to the effect early in, either in the election or after he won, where he said, in classic Obama, it was, this might be the exact quote, but it might be paraphrasing. It's like, to the cynics, the ground beneath you has shifted. Right. And as a cynic, no, no, man, it didn't. And when it did start to shift, it didn't shift in the way that he
no,
thought it
no,
did.
no.
And to bring up Obama, I think it's really important at this point that, like, you remember the keynote address in 2004 where he sort of rose to prominence on
Yeah,
the heels of this very, very eloquent Obama, esque fucking thing
he was a
that,
great speaker. Yep.
sure, whatever. I mean, I remember hearing him talk, and he does this bullshit thing of like, there's no liberal America and there's no conservative America. And I'm like,
What are you talking
like,
about?
either this is pure like political fucking nihilism, or you actually believe this. Those are the two options, because it's such a fucking ridiculous thing to say about America at any time, never mind 2004. But it just replays itself over and over and over again, right? And I don't, what's the saying, like, first is tragedy, then is farce,
Yeah,
right?
and what is
I,
it third time? I
right. Then
mean,
it's tragedy again, right? So you end up with the other night, where you get, I mean, there's so many different things. You get these people in the political mainframe of the Democratic Party who are kind of weepy and stunned, right? And like, oh, like the sympathy for Joe, but at
Joe
the
Biden
same
is a
time, like,
good man, but
look, I've Joe Biden is an honorable man. And it's not true. Good man, not true. None of this true. But saying all this stuff, but acting as though the time had now come for him to leave, that now they had the evidence they needed, when everybody outside of that political mainframe has been ringing this alarm bell, honestly, from the time they like bulldozed Bernie
yeah,
in 2020. Everybody has been saying this, and it goes back to all of these different moments. One of them in the Democratic Party is, or in the American political system, what the great one was like, well, everyone thought Saddam had WMD. It's like, no, I was around then, man.
yeah, I didn't
A
think
ton of
so.
people did not think so. A lot of people all over the world were insistent he did not,
Right, and I
actually.
mean there
But
was an inspector. He was there. He didn't find them. He went back.
right,
He didn't
right,
find them. He
right.
looked at this place, that
And then
place.
America has to be like, oh, well, there's no WMD. Everyone
Well,
thought it,
Michael,
and
we don't
everyone.
want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud, okay?
Yes, that's right. But so to bring that up to the debate moment, right? It's like, okay, the thing that, to me, my first take on it is that it was refreshing. It was really genuinely a
Just
refreshing
for a
moment.
brief moment in the aftermath of the debate, in which Biden, let's just be clear, stumbled over most of his words. I mean,
Yep.
he had few sentences that were delivered clearly and without some kind of error, either
Hmm.
an error of speaking or an error of fact or just an error of confusion, right? That was one of the
Yes.
things that kept happening.
Right.
In the aftermath, there was like an immediate like, oh my god kind of energy on the
Oh
like
yeah.
center left that has backed
I
Biden.
mean, during the debate, we were like, he he can't run, right? Like this is it.
I mean, he seemed dead on his
Yeah.
feet. I mean, he was
Yeah.
very visibly
Yeah.
pale. He looked much worse than Trump, who is also terrible and old and awful and should also not be running, etc. Just to get out ahead of that
Yes. Well, this is
endless.
the classic divide between the two parties, though. Is that once again, you know, look, just to be clear, I'm not a fan of the elder abuse that Joe Biden is enduring. What I am saying is that what I mean by refreshing is that it was undeniable.
Yeah,
These concerns that people have legitimately had, they get pushed to the side, have now placed the Democrats in a genuine electoral nightmare, and it's dangerous and it's fucked up to think that Trump will win, but like at a certain point, when are any of these people going to be held to account for anything they have done in modern American history? When?
I mean, I would say I mean, you mentioned WMDs, like all of the people that wrote op-eds for the New York Times in support
Yeah.
of that are still there if they want to be.
Yeah.
Like none of them
Yeah.
were
Of
like
course.
there's
And like I remember having this debate about the Bernie situation, but in 16 and 20, where some of my friends would be like, well, what Bernie wants to do wouldn't be possible. We wouldn't be able to get it done. We wouldn't be able to do it. He's too incendiary. And it's like the other guy, the guy on the other side, his campaign plank was that he was going to build a wall using money from another sovereign country who was going to apparently pay for the wall in between the two countries. And their party didn't worry about possibility.
right, and
He,
that completely didn't happen,
well,
but
but I'll tell you what did. He said he was going to do this massive tax cut.
that
Bernie's
happened.
out there trying. Bernie's out there being told he's trying the impossible by like returning tax rates to like 1990 levels or some bullshit,
Yeah.
and that's impossible. And that really is what it comes down to, is that somehow the Democrats are running against such a ridiculously flawed candidate and are on the defensive for our entire lifetime, essentially. Even Obama won and eventually spent 8 years on the defensive, right?
Yeah. No, I mean that's very well said. Yeah, I found watching the debate to be unbearable as you did. I picked up your guitar, I tuned it.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's
I
been a while.
yeah, I tuned it. I played some Oasis quietly, played some
I
Radiohead
did.
quietly. I played Champagne Supernova. I thought to myself, where was I while we were getting high?
While Biden
Because
was getting high,
yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it was really it was grim. I've had this experience a lot in recent years. I'm a pretty engaged political person. I follow this center left political newsletter called Political Wire. It's run by a boomer who I don't always agree with, but I think he just does a good job of like aggregating down the middle. He like gets a lot
Mhm.
of stories. He post links every day. I check that website like 50 times a day. I'm probably one of the youngest. I'm 43. I'm probably one of the youngest people that does this. um, I also listen to innumerable left-oriented podcasts. I subscribe to Jacobin. I'm like very involved in this, and yet when it comes to actually confronting the horror of an event
Yeah.
like watching a State of the Union or watching I
Yeah.
find it to be almost unbearable, right? I can like
Yeah.
think about these things in the abstract as much or read, like, oh, that's not good. Oh, I can't believe Gavin Newsom said that or blah blah blah,
Yeah.
like but when you're actually confronted with the spectacle of these two decrepit monsters on stage,
Mhm.
it's just what on earth have we done to deserve this? And it's like, oh, well,
A lot. Yeah. We've done a lot.
yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I don't think we need to go. I think most people who care about this sort of thing have already watched the highlights,
Oh,
low
sure.
lights of the
Yeah.
debate.
Yeah.
What were some of your favorite takes? Did you have any takes that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I mean, look, this goes back to sort of what I was saying before, that,
Yeah.
there is a group of people who have been running the Democratic Party who, even though they managed to already lose to this man in 2016, have largely just never been held to account for any of the incredibly poor political decisions that they have made. Bernie, making sure Bernie couldn't win in 2020 being chief among them.
Yeah.
And like just single-handedly, um, you know, not disenfranchising, but disillusioning millions of people for who basically rallied enough to get their guy in because of the fear of Trump. And you can
Well, and
discuss
also
whether
just
that's
how badly Trump handled COVID.
no,
I
sure.
mean,
But what
it's
I'm saying is
like
what I'm saying is then instead of taking that as a lesson and a gift from God
right.
that the votes got there, they have gone and made it even worse, both through what they have and haven't done. Obviously, the situation in Israel stands out.
Yeah.
And now they are running the guy. They didn't bother getting a one-term commitment to bring the party together, anything like that would
And
make
any
any
talk
sense.
of a primary from was just non-starter.
No, of
It
course, somehow, even though all of these concerns, obviously, like I will say that when like one take I have that
mm,
came to me while I was watching it was, and this is not to give these people any credit because they deserve nothing, um, was that his staffers set him up, both through the way that the debate was agreed upon,
yeah.
right? No
S-
fact checking,
So
um,
early.
so early, early enough that if this was to go like this, theoretically, they could ask him to leave and maybe there'd still be a chance to regroup. Um, the way he was prepared. I mean, why bother with some of the granular stuff that he's not going to be able to remember? Apparently, he wasn't well rested, according to people who are really
That to
upset.
me is like the most
I
insane
mean,
thing.
he looked like shit. He's looked better. Look at the State of the Union.
Yeah,
He
he
didn't
looked
look like that at
terrible.
the State of the Union.
No.
And it just makes it, and then all of a sudden it was like all this whole group of people start saying he should leave. Like the thing that really threw me was CNN. I mean, and this is not to give them any points, but it was crazy to see this panel of these people we've had to listen to for this long through all this bullshit be like, tonight I saw, and I say this in pain, that Joe Biden must move on, or he served our country, but and like to me, it's like this is too convenient. I mean, not to be
Well,
conspiratorial, but like it
no, no,
just seems like
I feel you. I mean, I was listening to the TrueAnon pod earlier, and they were talking about this very same issue, and they were talking about how there's two kind of ways to read this, right? On the one hand, yes, it's a conspiracy. It is weird that like Rachel Maddow, Anderson Cooper, Van Jones, the New
mhm,
York Times editorial board,
yes,
several New York to Christoph, Tom Friedman, all like immediately within the next 24 hours either said Biden should drop out for the good of the country or
yep,
dropped op-eds or editorials, suggesting that the time has come for Biden to move on. He's a great patriot, blah, blah, blah. But the most patriotic thing of all he could do was to drop out of the race to
yeah,
prevent Trump.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and it did feel a little bit like the fix was in, like when Clyburn
hmm
and those people in South Carolina called around and suddenly Mayor Pete and everyone dropped out of the race so
right.
that
They're all
Biden
getting on planes to meet Biden in Charleston or
and
whatever.
then like Elizabeth Warren did not drop out, curiously.
Yeah, that's weird. That was very weird.
um so that's one reading. Another reading is every now and then something so obvious happens that you can't deny it. You have like the winds of change are in the air. Biden looks so haggard, so
hmm
beatable, so utterly underwhelming that they're like, we can't. This is a nightmare.
Yeah,
A kind of reality shock just hits all these people at once, and they're like, this is the way the wind is blowing. We've got to get on. We got
right.
to get
And
on
that's
the.
and that reading, if the correct one, only increases my distaste for these people
Oh,
because
absolutely.
you definitely didn't hear any of them apologize for all the ways that they have helped uphold this bullshit this whole entire fucking
No,
time,
no, of
right?
course.
But
I
I loved. I mean, I read a lot of them, but like I loved these op-eds
yeah.
that came out kind of like they were writing to a a dying family member, you know? And like I sent you the one from Jay Perini. Face this guy.
Robert
And
Frost biographer Jay
yeah, and
Perini.
like I'm not gonna read too much of it, but
Sure,
the
please.
beginning, it was like he's writing to like his family in the Civil War
It's
or
like
some shit.
he has to go out and put Old Yeller down in the back
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something.
But the first, dear Joe. So he's writing this for CNN on their website.
Yeah.
Dear Joe, I write to you urgently as your old neighbor from Scranton. Like, please shut up right now. Like, and then of course, in all of these op-eds that all are about how sad it is and the weeping through it, he's getting these he's almost getting obituaries in these op-eds before he dies. It's kind of a unique phenomenon. So he goes on to say, few leaders in American history have had your big heart or sense of moderation. This guy's literally signing off on a genocide every single day.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to list all the amazing things that Joe Biden has done, and it really does sound like people are writing about a dead guy while he's trying to run a presidential campaign.
Yeah, it's I think it's interesting. So we're recording this on Monday night. The debate was Thursday. Uh, there's been a pushback that's been launched in the last couple days. Have you picked up on that a little bit? So,
Yeah.
for instance, like the Pod Save America guys on the night of the
Ugh.
debate were like, "Oh my God, this is a disaster." Apparently,
They're just so prescient.
apparently
I'm surprised
the
they got there.
straight members, they're all named John, right? The straight
Mhm.
Johns were like, "This is pretty bad, but like we've got to stick it out with Joe." Whereas the gay ones were like, you're lying to me. Like you can't lie to me.
Yeah.
My eyes just saw what I saw. Like this is not, and,
Mhm.
and apparently since then several of them have issued mea culpas.
Of course.
Sort of like, oh, actually, I would never want to impugn the honor and dignity of President
Right.
Biden, and so
Right.
there's like a couple of people have been kind of like rolling this back.
But these guys are all Obama guys, right?
Oh yeah.
And like that
Well,
again,
who's
like you have
behind all of this? It's all
right,
Obama.
you have a former president who would get up in front of all of us after every single, school shooting or mass shooting and quote, you know, the fierce urgency of now. How many times did he say this? The fierce
The
urgency of
moral
now.
arc of the universe bends
Right.
towards
And
justice.
he skated because his opponents were obstructing him. So he just kept saying, we should act urgently. And since he's been president, this guy has cowed from every single moment in which he could have had a positive effect. He said he wasn't going to put his finger on the scale in 2020. Then
Whoops.
he did. Right. Right. What did he do? He talked the NBA players union out of a strike, right? Let's
during
not forget
the
that.
COVID bubble, yeah.
And now it was, look, if this was going to happen in any real way, all of the crazy shit that would have had to happen for Biden to actually step down and get out of the race, the first guy who was going to have to say so was going to have to be Barack Obama.
Yeah.
He needed to go to the Camp David meeting and be like, it's over, Joe. And instead, the day after the debate, what did he do? He once again framed everything in this banal argument.
Nobody knows better than I do that we all have bad debates.
Right, but after this stupid flippant thing, he then
as if
says,
the debate is the problem and not a symptom of a much bigger problem, right?
Right. Then he gives us this classic, Democrat Obama wisdom of like the choice is still between a good man, not a good man, and the worst thing you've ever seen. And it's like, yes, man, even if I let you convince me that Joe Biden somewhere is a good man, it's that exact distinction that is the whole problem right now.
Yeah.
That you guys have built your entire political system on this fragile notion that, and the door is about to be blown through.
Yeah.
Right. And still in that moment, you can't even get me Gavin Newsom. It's not like we're going to get anybody good if Biden leaves, but they can't even do that.
Yeah.
They can't even in this moment. And he, he can talk all he wants about the fierce urgency of now when there's nothing that he can do because of the sort of the obstructions of his opponents. But this guy can run the Democratic Party if he wants to,
Yeah,
and he just once again showed what he actually wants, showed his actual beliefs.
yeah, yeah. So let's talk about what would happen under the two major options sadly still left to us, because after the Camp David meeting, all of Biden's family members apparently doubled down, said, Joe, you've got to win this for us.
And Hunter said, "You're the smartest guy I know," which,
I
hell of a
mean,
character witness.
God bless. um so if Biden wins, like, by some miracle, or if people just hate Trump that much, or what happens,
Yeah, he'll die in the second term.
you think it's very likely he'll die, or at least have to step down because of severe mental decline, right?
Correct. Correct.
And even if he does, say he wins and he keeps the Senate, he doesn't win back the House, uh, I'd say it's safe to assume that, like, the best we could hope for would be a continuity of the very bad status quo, right? I mean,
Yeah, I think
there's no big swings coming in a second Biden term, right? There's no
no.
we're not gonna, Medicare for all is not gonna, like, it's
Yeah,
not
right,
to quote
right,
Rick
right,
Pitino, it's not
right.
walking through that
The
door,
fierce
right?
urgency of now, finally, gun control in America. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and he's not going to pack the court, right? I mean, that's another thing that happened
right.
just in the immediate aftermath.
But I'm sure he's ready to go to war on climate change.
Yeah, and although, I guess, I mean, today, uh, on the 1st of July 2024, the Supreme Court announced that actually anything the president does, as long as it's an official act,
Mm,
is above the law, essentially, right?
cool. It's a good turn.
It's good timing too. It's like, all right,
Yeah.
Biden's sundowning. Oh, Trump is, like, probably going to win again. By the way, when he becomes president again, everything he does will be,
Right.
beyond reproach. I
Right.
mean,
And this is the line that the Democrats keep walking, which is like, I mean, yes, the fear of a Trump reelection is genuine, and there are serious concerns in all spheres
yeah,
of society. But you're the ones creating that danger.
yeah,
You are creating that danger. I don't care what anybody says about Donald Trump. That man could not win an election right now against any reasonable candidate. Maybe now, because Biden, if he leaves, whoever comes in is not going to have the same shot that they would have. But this was a free election, much like 2016.
yeah.
And they've created this danger, and then they talk about how everybody else has created the danger of Trump.
Well, Michael,
The only ones.
this is the most important election of our lifetime.
Yes, exactly. Right, right,
Just
and,
like 2020, 2016, 2012,
right. And this is the
2008,
thing. This is the thing.
2004.
This is the thing. If you want to keep telling me it's the most important election of our lifetime,
Yeah,
then do one thing that suggests that. Because
absolutely.
none of your actions have ever suggested that any of these elections are remotely important. From 2000 on, they've actually shown me that they actually don't think the elections are important at all. And so, like, when you get to this point now, the power of whatever, the 45% of people who will vote for Trump and the 30% who probably, like, really want him to be president, the power shift is so obvious to me. One of them might be wrong in all of their calculations about politics, the economy, society, philosophy, principles. They might be wrong about everything, but they think it's all on the line for real,
Yeah.
and they are acting accordingly. People on the other side are trying to get Joe Biden to be president again. Now, if you don't understand the gap politically and how that is a massive advantage to people trying to take power, then you just haven't been following any of this in American modern history.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about what will happen if Trump is reelected to be president for the second non-consecutive time, joining Grover Cleveland as the only person to
Mm.
achieve this honor. You've heard about Project 2025? aka
Yeah, why don't you
Presidential
explain it a little
Transition
bit?
Project. So this is basically the blueprint about what the Heritage Foundation, one of our most wonderful foundations, is saying that Trump should do if he takes power again. And essentially, reading through their platform today was, it's like every right wing, like, horror thing you can imagine. Recentering a life of spirituality and faith,
Mm-hmm.
refocusing American life on the sacred nuclear family, um, outlawing all appearances of LGBTQ and especially trans
Yeah.
representation in
God.
schools, libraries. These are all like just things they talk about explicitly. But the functional main goal of this platform is to replace federal employees who have long been seen as non-political, have reclassified them at,
Hmm.
in places like the EPA, the budget,
Yeah.
and not just the top people who are always traded in when a new president comes in, the workers, the average people. And the way they're going to do this is they're going to do surveys of every single person, and based on the answers they give to these surveys, they'll either be fired and replaced by a Trump loyalist or retained if they're seen to be adequately.
Hopefully, there's a lot of honorable servants who will lie on those surveys to say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right?
And also, won't they be way less effective with the Chevron ruling? Isn't that also a huge concern?
Yeah, I mean, that actually doesn't bother them because they want businesses to be
Right, but I'm
run
saying
right.
even people that they wouldn't be able to
Oh yeah,
replace.
yeah. It's it's just victory after
I mean,
victory.
to say nothing of obviously the horrific position that this puts all types of communities, the threat that they would be under, to me is undoubted. I mean, I'm not one of these, there is this element on the left, I think, that acts like, oh, I mean, it actually wasn't actually that bad. The 4 years that Trump was in, turns out he's largely ineffective, and what's the difference or
I mean,
whatever. And I don't
I would
really,
agree that he was largely ineffective. I have no
yes,
reason to assume that he would be as ineffective the second time
that's
around.
what I'm saying, is that I think that it is not fear mongering to be like, this is going to be different.
And
There
worse.
is, yes, there is, I think, with the way that the court has moved and the way that he has totally taken over that party in every single manner.
Yeah.
Um, and all of that combines for a possibility that the truly evil people that run Trump can do some serious damage. But again, this is the paradox that the Democratic Party is responsible
Oh
for,
no.
nobody else,
No,
right?
I agree.
Like, the courts too. I mean, Ginsburg, I mean, like, this is all of a piece. And, now we're in this spot where, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think Biden will stay in? And even if he stays in, do you think that he will make
Well,
it to election day as the nominee?
yeah. I mean, at this
Yeah.
point, I would say yes to both. Much as it pains me, I just don't think there's actually the will to change. Right? There is not the will.
Do you think that he will win against Trump?
No. Like, based on the last week and just vibes, I'm not gonna say that I think he'll win against Trump.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said this earlier in the podcast, but I think that, like, the real overwhelming tragedy of running Biden here is that Trump is also objectively mentally unfit for the office,
Well, and like the
right?
people around him, I just want to read a couple things from this 2025, from the intro to this 2025
Yeah.
project statement. The long march of cultural Marxism through our institutions has come to pass. The federal government is a behemoth weaponized against American citizens and conservative values, with freedom and liberty under siege as never before. He goes on to say that he interprets the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence to refer to the pursuit of blessedness. And to me, it's just like, are you fucking kidding me? You fucking loser? Like,
Yeah.
cultural Marxism? First of all, cultural Marxism is just a nonsense concept from the get
Hmm.
go. Doesn't make any sense. They're like, oh, like, DEI is cultural Marxism. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like
Yeah.
Marxism is I'm not going to go all the way, but it's an analysis of economics that has a political, dimension, obviously.
Sure.
But it's like, like it doesn't make
But
sense to apply that term to like
right.
the interrelations of like different ethnicities within the United States cultural space. Like it just
Right, but like
doesn't
this is
make
this
sense.
but this is the power that they have, right? Is that the politics are fundamentally irrational. So they're
No,
supposed to be like that,
I
right?
know, but I mean,
But like
cultural
wait,
Marxism, Michael, is like 5 cycles ago of like a term.
yeah,
That what I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah,
is
yeah,
like
yeah.
even this, which is like this cutting edge, quote unquote, right wing, is like, bro, this reads like it was written in 2015. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
what are you doing, you
Hmm.
loser? Like, at
But
least, at
you know,
least,
I think all of these people in the Trump world, they sense like a real opportunity to affect the world in the way that they want to. And I think that like for a brief moment, and obviously it's for way different ends and way different possibilities, I think that feeling existed for a lot of people in 2020 with the
Biden,
brief
yeah.
with the brief Sanders front
Oh,
runner
with Bernie, yeah.
situation.
Oh God,
That
which
that like
coincided exactly with the
right.
the COVID
But for
outbreak.
these people are so deranged that they talk about cultural Marxism and Marxism. They'll just throw or socialism, whatever, these things that don't exist in America. And you can see how far away that end is. That like the Sanders thing and even the ideas, never mind letting him run, any of the ideas that he had suggested that had huge popular appeal, uh, have been even close to being attempted. And just to go
Yeah.
back quickly, like they don't like there are definitely people who want to like drastically drag this country backwards, who don't give a flying fuck about Donald Trump. He's just there. It works well for them to that people like the Heritage Foundation. The trick of Trump that appears to have happened in my mind
Mm.
watching the debate is that this man has been known as a con artist and a liar his whole life, and it is now a huge political positive. It saves him because now, when I watch him in the debate, he appears to me to be just as crazy as Joe Biden, just as done mentally, and that somewhere along the way, his ability to lie in a calculated way or with an aim has given way to this completely ridiculous, rudderless nonsense that comes out of his mouth. Obviously, none of it is true, but the beauty is it looks like it's part of his shtick the whole time. So
Well, it's
he
part of his
seems like he's
person, like
less
his
right.
personality. We just know that we're so used to him. And like this is one thing that I thought about a lot during the debate is there are too many people constantly doing Trump impressions to the point
Yeah.
where when I hear Trump doing himself, I'm like, oh, ha ha ha, that's just like that comedian I like
Right.
who's always doing
Right.
the really good Trump. Wow, that comedian, and I'm thinking more about the impression than I am about any
Sure.
Well, because there's nothing to think about with regard to the content. I mean, everything that he says is bullshit. Like he's a
But you could easily have had, from in an objective sense, the exact same op-eds about Donald Trump.
yeah,
You
and
know,
believe me,
and
oh Michael, there were many calls for this on the internet.
yes, right, right. But they don't affect him. That's the strength. That's his political gravity. It doesn't affect him because he looks like he's just a more things are more desperate now. He's got to make it even greater again. The whole country is even worse shape now. So of course the lies are going to be bigger. Of course the nonsense is going to get accepted because it's all on the line. And whereas Biden can't do anything like that, his decline looks like a decline.
Yeah.
If you go back and look at this,
Right. No,
Joe
Trump, in a
Biden,
weird way, Trump has descended more into himself,
I
right?
mean, exactly. Look at Joe Biden in the debate with, was it Paul Ryan?
Sarah
Right?
Palin,
That
Paul
was
Ryan, yeah,
Look at Paul Ryan in 2012. I mean, like it's night and day.
yeah,
Whereas Trump, it just looks like an exaggerated version of "you're fired."
yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah. Let's think about as we wrap up, let's think about a couple of like historical precedents. Like the one obvious one that everyone always brings up in these scenarios in terms of like I mean, this this whole election feels symptomatic of an empire and a polity in decline, perhaps terminal
Yeah,
decline. And whenever any country is declining, you point to the Roman Empire, right?
sure.
And the Roman Empire in its later stages, at least in the Western Roman Empire, let us not forget the East persisted for 1,000 more years. Um, Quite different, really, like no comparison, right? That was a
Mhm.
country that had already succumbed to autocracy, which is like the great danger that might be about to overtake the United States, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think better example is French Revolution, uh,
Why?
the last days of the Bourbon monarchs, because I think the Democratic grandees and Biden, the people around Biden, feel almost as out of touch with like reality as Louis the 16th. Like what
Hmm.
Louis the 16th like? You know what he really liked to do? He loved to make clocks. He was obsessed with clocks. He was in his palace at Versailles, which, if you've ever visited, it's quite large.
Hmm.
Um, it's also not near any real people, right? I mean,
No.
there's like a village there now, but this was, separated from Paris. He would just be like in the garden, like tinkering on a little clock. Meanwhile, like his ministers are like trying to like peg bread prices, and the people are just getting angrier, angrier, and
Yeah.
angrier. And by the time they come to like storm Versailles, it's like the royal family are like, what's happening? There was a little bit of that energy to me in the reaction, or this the sort of mock surprise of all these people being like, wow, Biden really is that bad. It's like,
Yeah.
motherfucker, we've been telling you that Biden's this out of touch for fucking 4 years. Like,
Yeah.
we were saying this in 2020 when he was running against Bernie. And they were like, I don't know, Bernie had that heart thing. He's pretty old.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, Bernie
and
was,
is very sexist.
yeah, yeah,
Just threw that out
and
there.
is an anti-Semite, right? It's like, let's call the Jewish candidate an anti-Semite. Well, why
Yeah.
not? Let's just go for it.
Yeah.
Working against Corbyn, but anyway, I mean, Corbyn wasn't Jewish, obviously, but that's like a classic attack at the left. It's
Yeah.
like, the other thing that I thought about was Soviet gerontocracy, right? We brought
Yeah.
this up a little bit earlier. The Soviet Union had this real problem in the 70s and 80s where the only people that were eligible to be like in charge on the Politburo, which was like the sort of central committee that ran the whole country, were all veterans of World War II, right? And in
Hmm.
the 50s, after Stalin, this was good. You get Khrushchev in there. He sort of undoes some of the more shall we say murderous aspects of Stalinism, right? Brezhnev takes over and then is in charge from, I believe, 1964 until 1982. And Brezhnev has a lot of Trumpian characteristics, right? Brezhnev was the guy that loved to give himself medals. So there are all these photos of Brezhnev where his entire like left chest is just
Yeah.
like armored with pins and medals of valor that he's just awarded himself, to the point where it's like, all right, like I think if this were a fictional story, I'd be like, all right, the author has gone too far. Like this,
That's right.
right? And immediately after Brezhnev, I think it was Andropov took over, and he was like almost 70, and within a year dead, or maybe 2 years. And then I think there's a guy called Chernenko who took over, also 70, another year and a half dead. So you just had this like this sequence of old men who
Hmm.
just kept dying very quickly. And then it's like you get Gorbachev in 85, right? Gorbachev, who just died, in the last year, uh, was young, right? I think he was 50 maybe, right?
Hmm.
But then it's like too late.
Yep.
You like finally get someone who's young. He takes a look at the situation and is like, oh my god, like, wait, what were we doing for the last 25 years? Like,
Yeah.
this is not good. Like, our economy makes no sense. We're propping up these industries, but what about the? Oh no, right? And it's like, so in
Yeah.
his attempt to like address the rot of 20 years of like accumulated rule by the same, not elected in this case, but same body of old men, the entire system collapses to the point
Right.
where,
And I think that's, to bring it back to now, it's like we are at some closer to end stage of that chunk of time you're describing before Gorbachev, right? Where the sense of the system collapsing is the most painful part is it's so evident to everybody. I mean, like you just any look at anything,
yeah,
it's you do just as well to argue that it has collapsed, and we have entered this sort of recent history of an administration of a government and a politics is essentially built around the notion of managing a collapsed thing. And so that brings us to Biden, who is sort of the perfect sort of personification of
yeah,
this, right? He is a collapsed entity who is being resuscitated to try to take what is deemed to be the safer approach. And that's sort of, again, you see this again with the Democrats trying to figure out what to do. They want to know what the safer approach is. This is what it comes down to. What's the safest thing we can do to make sure Trump doesn't become president? What's the safest way? And the thing is, you wouldn't trust these people to make either of these scenarios safe, whether it's, Biden to hang on and try to run, or what? You're going to trust
they're,
this
they're
group
gonna
of
they're
people
gonna
with
pick the replacement for Biden.
a brokered convention? Like, what are the options here? And why would you think that these people would be able to do it? And in
Yeah,
fact, what I mean by, to go all the way back to the beginning of the podcast, what I sort of think I mean by refreshing to have watched it is that you can see that these people, whether it's the Van Joneses or the op-eds or the staffers or people now calling for him to leave, even elected officials apparently have said he should get out, that they have put themselves in a situation where every single option is nothing but dangerous. There
yeah,
is no safe approach. And if you're going to start, once again, splitting hairs and determining what the safest of a nightmare risky approach is, then you're just going to be doing the same thing that you've been doing this entire time.
that's right. I kept thinking of that Yeats line from Sailing to Byzantium, right? Fastened to a dying animal, right? like,
Right.
like that's how I sort of feel as an
Right.
American at this point. It's
Right.
like,
Right.
here we
And
are.
to see him just represent that so perfectly, that the
Yeah.
entire weight of this thing, you feel that you're fastened to this society that is
Well,
collapsed
you're
and
on a
collapsing.
train and you can like see the tracks haven't been finished and the train's not
Right.
slowing down.
Right. I mean, what was the line from Oryx and Crake
Yeah,
just
yeah,
last
yeah,
week,
yeah.
right?
We're in
It's
we're
like
in a tunnel, but the water's moving faster than the boat, so there's no
the
way we
water's
can
moving
like.
faster than the
No,
boat. And
exactly. Yeah.
and that is what's exactly what's happening in at every level of our society. And now it's crystallized in, you know, what may just be the most important election of our lifetime, right? Like that's
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any final thoughts before we talk about what we're doing next week? I think we've hit on some good. We've vented some of our frustrations. We've hit on some of the main issues at play in this upcoming election. And
yeah.
I just like to
We
say,
did say we were going to cover some highs and lows, but I
I,
I genuinely I don't have a
there
high.
isn't any.
It's like
There were no highs.
I
There-
don't see a path to anything other than calamity here.
yeah, nor do I.
So no, I think that's my final thought on it.
Yeah. Um, well, in keeping with this theme, next week we'll be going back in time. We'll be
Mhm.
looking at a little event or series of events known as the Bronze Age collapse. Now, these are uh, civilizations that all are at or around 1200 BCE, went from flourishing literate cultures to in some cases utter ruin, and in many
Mhm.
cases great diminishment over the span of 40 to 50 years or so. And we'll be looking at Eric Klein's book, 1177 BCE, which is like, or I think it's just 1177 BC, where it's like the year civilization collapsed. Just as
Right.
the publisher chose that title, but it's a
It's that
good.
utter ruin or great diminishment sounds like the stakes of this election, kind of.
That's why I thought this would make a logical. We were gonna do this. We were gonna do this before. I mean, before you suggested the election, but then once you were like, "Let's do the election," I was like, "Oh, good," because that'll be a perfect lead-in to what we do the following week, which is we talk about an earlier moment
Right.
of civilizational failure. Um, and I think that's going to be really interesting. I would encourage everyone to follow us on Instagram at End of the World WMS. Follow the pod, share the pod widely, tell your friends about the pod. We're always looking to get the pod into the earbuds of new listeners. Uh, and vote blue no matter who, I would say. Oh, wait, no. Yeah. But Bronze Age collapse is going to be good, and it'll be fun to sort of call back to some of the things that maybe are similar to our prediction as we examine an ancient one. But until then, this has been the End of the World with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I am Stu, and we'll talk to you